Welcome to Discovery Watch with John Kaiser.
I'm your host, Jim Goddard. Welcome back to the show, John.
Jim, pleasure to be back on the show.
John, Scandium International is perking up ahead of the June 3rd annual general meeting. Do you think management will have good news for their shareholders?
Jim, after such a long silence with regard to what they are up to, what their plans are, when something would be happen, it would just be wonderful for them to announce the day before that a critical metals recovery deal, hosting deal, has been secured with the likes of Freeport or ASARCO. But I think that is just too much to hope for because the company does not control the decision on this type of major transaction. That control lies with the other side, the owner of the copper oxide leaching operation. They are going to be the ones that decide on their timeline. Now, what the market might expect is that in light of their 10Q disclosures that they are willing to contemplate a high purity alumina project that, could be part of the critical metals recovery strategy, but could also be a standalone. We talked about that last Wednesday. That would be something that the company could talk to the shareholders about. I know my shareholders are pretty frustrated. Some of them have even bothered to send in their proxies and have withheld votes for certain members of the board as a way of protest. It's a waste of time doing so. It doesn't change anything because as long as the Evansons with their 70 million share block are happy with the way things are going, along with Willem Divestine with his 26 million share block, the 55%ers can't change a thing about how the corporate culture at Scandium International is operated. But the day after our session last week, they did put out a news release basically saying, yes, we were granted two important patents on April 27th, 5 days before we granted ourselves options at 18 cents, 6,750,000. And I gather somebody must have complained or they heard my episode several weeks ago where I, on behalf of the 55%ers, disclosed that these important patents had been granted thanks to one of my subscribers flagging it on one of these patent filing services. But what was interesting about this press release is it went above and beyond just telling us what we already knew. They talked about a couple of pending patent applications, which they have never really done before in any detail. For example, the one they got granted was for recovering scandium in the critical metals recovery copper oxide leaching process. But the other one is it's for recovering other metals, and they list nickel, cobalt, copper, zinc, manganese, beryllium, aluminum, and rhenium as metals. Now, only some of those were mentioned before, and including copper is kind of interesting because you would think that the solvent extraction would recover all the copper that's in the leaching solution and not pump any of it back onto the leach pile. So maybe their method, maybe some copper just isn't recoverable by solvent extraction and ion exchange could recover it. So even this process could even help companies boost their copper output. What was interesting was the mention of beryllium and rhenium. Rhenium, both of these are metals with very high melt temperatures, so they are used in space and military applications where you have very intensive operating conditions. And rhenium is so low grade naturally that deposits don't even usually have an assay for it because it has too many zeros in front of the number. But it does show up in the concentrate, the molybdic oxide concentrates, and when they are roasted, rhenium gets recovered at that level. So it's a very rare metal. Absolutely no primary production for it is possible. But beryllium's interesting. It's included in the United States critical metals list, and that's very strange because Materion's Spore Mountain deposit in Utah supplies 90% of world global demand for beryllium. And you wonder, well, why would this be critical? I mean, they basically own this space. The problem is the bertrandite does not upgrade to the purity required for those space age and military applications. So Materion imports beryl, the semi-precious form, from the places like Colombia where it's hand-cobbed, and it uses that to upgrade to make the 4, 5, 6N purity required for these specialized applications. And what's interesting is I'd heard in passing that these copper leachates have a surprising amount of beryllium dissolved into it. And so now they finally said that, yes, beryllium is something that we can recover with our method. So this is very interesting. Another reason for Freeport to do a deal so that this critical metal can be recovered. But the other one, the patent application that they talked about that was really interesting was one called direct scandium alloying. And then they've already received patents for a method for making master alloy that may be more efficient than other methods, but other methods for making master alloy exist, so that's not a very big deal. But the direct scandium alloying patent application is very interesting because it's about putting scandium oxide powder directly into a melt bath, say aluminum and magnesium, to create the precise scandium percentage needed for the strength push required for that particular alloy. And the reason this is important is that because scandium has a high melting temperature, when you melt the master alloy and blend it into the aluminum magnesium bath, you have to get the entire temperature high enough to melt the scandium. And that means very intensive conditions and also special fumigation, getting rid of the gases, and not the sort of thing that your typical factory wants to, be involved with. And in this particular case, they talk about with alloy casting, where you create the melt and then pour it into dies and molds to make particular shapes. And so this method that they've applied a patent for could be very interesting for the company because the likes of Rio Tinto, which is moving back into the aluminum alloy space, this would be a reason for them to pay attention to Scandium International, even though they don't need the Ningen deposit quite yet and don't really care about the critical metals recovery strategy that SCY is pursuing. They would be very interested in a method that allows the scandium oxide to be blended into these alloys without having it super high temperature, without using the master alloy. So this is a very interesting patent application that they talked about. It's a bit of a change because usually they are very reticent about saying anything about what they're doing, and this probably has implications for the relationship with Eck Industries, which has developed a new alloy, a Series 5 type with aluminum and magnesium and scandium that uses cerium in place of silicon, and it's a casting alloy, and it could become a very significant part of the electric vehicle future. And even if combustion engines continue and the desire is to minimize fuel, it would also be quite relevant to that. So ideally, we would get on June 3rd, we would get an updated corporate presentation, maybe even a webcast where the CEO goes through what the current plans are, where things stand, what the hopes are, maybe give people some sense of a timeline. But most importantly, they could talk about high purity alumina, because from the way that it's described in the 10Q, this is not just an aspect of the critical metals recovery plan. This is something they could do on a standalone basis. This is what the MBAs, number crunchers, live for. You measure the inputs, you cost them, you set up the scale, you look at the existing market, which in this case is already $1 to $2 billion. You have a method for making it cheaper than the competition, and you just raise the capital to make it all happen. This is the type of story that SCY, if it actually does work, could control all on its own, because its destiny has always been under the control of others, be it somebody like a permitting body having to make a decision, or a Freeport or a Sarco finally deciding that they want to do a CMR deal, or dealing with various end users and getting an offtake order for something that they won't be able to deliver for 2 or 3 weeks, years, until they've raised the $100 million and built the Ningen mine. So this is something where they could take control of. It's something the Peter and Chris Evanson, who have investment banking backgrounds, would completely understand. And I suspect that the stock is trending up because people are digesting this high purity alumina angle and saying, this company could finally get wings that takes it a flight on its own accord and attracts the capital needed. And then all those other assets, the urgency to have it done yesterday, patience comes in and say, okay, yes, get the CMR done when you can, build Ningen when the global demand for scandium has gone to 50 tons, and then get this show on the road, and hopefully there is a corporate culture change at the company where they embrace the 55% shareholders as allies and friends rather than this annoying enemy that keeps bugging about when things are going to happen and why haven't you done this or that. So I think the uptrend is about people appreciating that this high purity alumina project has serious legs to it.
We'll have more with John Kaiser right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with John Kaiser. John, why did the price of Nevada Exploration Incorporated drop this week?
Well, the stock was sort of hovering in that 16 to 18 cent range. It had drifted back. Their last update on the South Grass Valley drilling was on May 3rd. They were at 1,300 meter depth at the time. And there has been no word as to whether this hole even finished, how deep they got, what they saw beyond the 954 meters that they had logged core for on May 3rd. But on Monday, they announced a private placement of 25 million units at 13 cents, a half cent higher than the 12.5 cent financing that raised a couple $1 million in December. And it includes a whole warrant of at 20 cents. It does have an acceleration clause, but that's 50 million share dilution, bringing fully diluted up to 238 million to raise 3.25 million. This first hole apparently did finally finish last week. It took a lot longer and was much more expensive than expected. The $2 million was only going to probably accomplish 3 holes out of the 10 that they feel they need to properly test the East Golden Gorge target, and I suspect that that $2 million will now be only good for 2 holes. The second hole apparently is being mobilized now. It's much farther to the south than the first hole. But if they get this financing done, they'll have probably about $4 million in the treasury, and they'll get the 7 to 9 holes that they need to properly test this play. And South Grass Valley suffers from the stigma that it's in the middle of nowhere with no gold zone. It's in a 20-kilometer radius. It's outside the main trends such as Battle Mountain, Carlin, and Getchell. There is lower plate to the south of that property, but it's unaltered. It's been drilled in the past. It outcrops, and the area there's it's no reason to believe that there's a lot of gold there. So when they used that gold and groundwater strategy to establish this target and started drilling it in late 2018 and confirmed a giant hydrothermal system that's intensely altered the lower plate rocks and that has all the Carlin pathfinders in it, that was a really, really big deal, and it was all blind, all undercover. And the company itself thinks, well, in the context of John Montine's theory of the subduction, the Farallon subduction slab rollback, this area should be just as prospective for Carlin type deposits, rich gold deposits, as all these other trends. And the key is to have a deep-seated fault structure that reaches through the crust into the mantle below, where these brines that soaked up arsenic and antimony and gold ponded and then were released by the magnetism that followed as the subduction slab rolled back. But until you see an ore grade interval, it's always possible that maybe this is a place where, yes, you have all the Carlin pathfinders, but no gold. And so the company has been laboring to get over that hump. Now, this first hole is interesting because they spent the first 2.5 years testing pretty much west of this north-south structure they call the Water Canyon Corridor, and they didn't want to go there because the basement bedrock plunges, the gravel gets deeper, and so that means more drilling through gravel before you get into bedrock. But when they assayed all these other holes, the core hole set in 2018-19, the RC holes, they realized that the fluid flow was from that Water Canyon corridor, and that the area to the west of it, what they now call the East Golden Gorge target, that is the best place where gold would have piled up. And they also figured out that the stratigraphy, it's somewhat different from what it is in the Carlin trend, and what it is in the Cortez trend. But they identified this Cambrian-aged CLM formation as the right kind of sponge, equivalent to what the Wind Band 5 does in the Gold Rush Cortez area, and that they needed to drill down into this. And this first hole, they spotted it to the east of this fault structure, and it was supposed to go through it. And one of the things that emerged on that May 3rd news release was that they were down 954 meters in terms of log core. The gravel was 550 meters deep, so a lot deeper than it was in the west where they had drilled the earlier holes. And they revealed something with it. It was kind of a geological word salad, but I talked to Wade afterwards to have him explain it. And what you have is you have the layer cake stratigraphy dipping at 15 degrees from the west to the east, somehow plunging into this fault structure. And they really didn't have any idea what was happening on the eastern side of this fault structure because that's all completely blind. And so they were hoping to drill through this Water Canyon corridor into the layer cake, into the Cambrian aged formation, the CLM, and hopefully find gold enrichment close to the main structure where other faults carry it into the layer cake. And what turned out to be the case is they may have been too far east with this first hole because the stratigraphy has a major kink in it, like it was bent upwards, so that on the eastern side, it is dipping to the west rather than to the east at 70 degrees. And they said this is like a chevron pattern, a V-shaped type of thing, which meant that they were drilling down sort of down dip of the bedding, and they were stuck in the Goodwin formation, which is a limestone, but it's not the one that's going to have the gold piling up into it. The CLM formation is beneath that. And when I talked to Wade, I said, well, you're at, the news release said you were at 1,300 meters. You described it to 954 meters. What are you seeing beyond that? Did you ever get out of this Goodwin formation? What happens as you get deeper? He said, I don't know. I just received 300 meters of core box, and I'm just beginning to open them. And I haven't talked to them since then, and they haven't let Wade talk to anybody either. But I was surprised to find out last week that they were still drilling at this hole that, with only about 70 meters to go, the maximum was going to be 1,400 meters. But something persuaded them to push on. Whatever Wade saw in these boxes and what they were continuing to see while they're logging it, you don't waste time and money pushing a hopeless hole deeper. And they do have an XRF unit, which can measure the content of arsenic and antimony. And while in this particular location there's no correlation with gold, this is unlike, say, Endurance Gold's project at Reliance, where the arsenic is very strongly 80% correlated with gold grade. So they do their XRF readings, they publish it, and gives us kind of an advance clue as to what the assays are going to be about when they're finally received. In this case, you just don't know. But I think pushing this hole deeper after this depressing realization that we're probably too far east and might never hit the CLM formation, I suspect that they've learned an awful lot in the last 3 weeks as they logged the other core, pushed this thing further, and apparently finally stopped it. We won't know if there's any gold in it until 6 to 8 weeks from now. But they decided, well, we blew way more money on this hole. We need to do this financing. And they announced it on Tuesday without doing the monthly update. And they've apparently been advised that you should not do any update until you close this financing. So with this financing, if it gets closed quickly and it's a lucrative price, they have a lot more information now about what's happening inside the Water Canyon corridor. And all the sort of body language says that if we close this, we'll be able to make or break the story that this is a North Carlin type district, that the Water Canyon corridor is very similar to the post-fault, that the type of geology altered lower plates, carbonates that we're seeing here are very similar. And so I've to try and figure out, well, what if they find something like the Mico Deep Post Rodeo zones in the Gold Strike system, which are underground mineable, and they were 20 gram per ton average, 16 million tons. If they found something like that and developed this as an underground mine, what would this be worth? And the size of this prize is quite surprising. It is very, very substantial. It's only about 10 million ounces in situ, this type of scenario, with about 9 million recoverable, which is, only about a fifth or a sixth of the 50 million plus ounces that are in the Gold Strike area. But the Gold Strike area has the benefit of being closer to surface and being able to open pit mine. In this area here, it's all or nothing. It's going to be underground. You're dealing with 500 meters of gravel cover, and then you're still dealing with some stratigraphy that's not going to have anything in it. So if this is going to be anything, it's going to be a high-grade discovery. And once they get over this hump of skepticism that maybe all you have are pathfinder elements and just no meaningful amount of gold, then this play comes to life. And with this financing, I think they finally have the fuel in the tank to make or break the South Grass Valley story. And it may take all year to get it done, but at least for those who have been holding this stock forever, there's finally light at the end of the tunnel, either a fantastic discovery or a reason to say goodbye to this story.
We'll have more with John Kaiser right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with John Kaiser. John, why did Harfang Exploration drop last week after publishing an update about its Serpent drill program?
The company reported assays for the first 13 of 27 holes that it drilled on the Serpent project, which is in the James Bay region, southwest of Quebec Precious Metals Sakami Gold project. And this is the first time this property, after 4 years of trenching and sampling, that it's been drilled. And while they did get gold intersections, 6 of the holes had gold intervals in it. They were not super spectacular. The best was, say, number 13 with 7.5 meters of 3.47 gram per ton gold. And then number 2, which had a 0.7 meter spike of 47 gram per gold, that was actually visible gold, and another set interval 15.2 meters of 1.44 gram per ton gold. And then they had some other shorter intervals. But what they didn't have was a boomer discovery intersection. And that is what the market still wants. So there was this knee-jerk reaction, say, oh, okay, half the holes are in and there's nothing spectacular in it. It's a 10-kilometer long system called the stew structure. The western 6 kilometers has a 2-kilometer golden till anomaly, one of the biggest in North America, according to Stu Averill. And the purpose of this drill program was to try and tag into a very rich gold structure that was the source. But this was a scout drilling program, and it only covered a 1-kilometer segment, and it happened to be the segment that's covered by a swamp for which they did not have any till sample data, and you don't really want to drill that during the summer because it's very expensive helicopter support and have to build platforms that be on the swamp. So they wanted to test this during the winter. And they had done an IP survey at the beginning of the year in the hope that chargeability highs would help them see the mineralized structure. And a lot of this ended up distracting them in the beginning. The IP anomalies turned out to deliver nothing of interest. And they said, okay, the IP is not working. It's not going to be a helpful tool. So then they resorted to grid drilling the swamp area, because one of the key things they wanted to know is this golden till anomaly truly local, and is sort of where we're seeing this west-east oriented stew structure defined by a linear magnetic anomaly. Is this indeed the sort of northern limit of this golden till? And the intervals that they did get, and for which they got assays, Francois Goulet says that these do not explain the intensity of the golden till anomaly, but we did see proof as we marched the grid north that it all disappears, and we did see enough in here to say, yes, this golden till anomaly is locally derived. And one of the important things, hole number 2 was drilled into this magnetic structure. They now think the stew structure is actually several parallel gabbroic shear structures that are mineralized, so they're calling this just the gold structure because they have one hole number 17 that's still pending, which stepped north of this magnetic anomaly, and it also intersected something that looks like it will run gold. So of the remaining holes, there's about 4 of them that that they have high hopes for. One of them is within that magnetic anomaly. It's either number 23 or 27. Both of them are in there, but one of them has visible gold in it. And they now realize that they need to focus on these magnetic anomalies for finding where the gold is hung up. And with only 1 kilometer segment drill tested in the swampy area, they did this deliberately because they now know that when summer returns, and they'll be back in there in June, they will do stripping and trenching along the trend of this structure to expose it at surface, to channel sample it, to try and better understand what are the controls of the gold within this system. They may do a small drill program in September, depending on results, but most likely it's Q1 of 2022 that we'll see a major program. They still have $8.5 million left. From a proof of concept perspective, this scout drilling program, which is largely blind because most of that area had overburden or swamp on it, it was a success. And that's the part that the market didn't really understand, that for the geologists, they finally now know what it is that they need to do to hunt down the gold quarry within this big system. They now understand where they should be looking. So all the future work will be much more focused and likely to deliver the kind of results where people say, wow, finally something truly special for the James Bay region. So I had it as a bottom fish because bottom fish favorite because I wasn't sure if this thing was ever going to amount to anything, but I upgraded it to good spec value last week based on this realization that this is a system that has high grade gold within it. They understand the host for it, and it's different from other systems within the James Bay region. And this could be what finally puts James Bay on the gold map, and not with just some little gold mineralized pencil deposit, such as another company is pulling good intersections from, which are not true width, which are almost down plunge to pencil. This is a big 10-kilometer long system. It's also pretty wide, and this could be the big discovery, but we probably won't know for sure until the first quarter of next year.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
We've been speaking with John Kaiser, his website, kaiserresearch.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Discovery Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at howstreet.com. Discovery Watch is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.